It's 10:05 a.m. on April 28th, 2014. It's a nice sunny day here at the southern end of the Salish Sea in the North American continent on planet Terra. This is the Immediacy Data Intelligence Report for this last week in April and the first 2 weeks in May. These reports, by the way, are based on data sets that are most effective 3 to 4 days out from the time of the data capture and interpretation out through the end of the third week at its maximal range of the immediacy data. We also do have some short-term data as well because we've gotten another server operating. It's not very voluminous relative to the immediacy data. So we've got a number of subjects to cover. We're going to go through them relatively quickly. I don't have a whole lot of time to devote to each and every one of these. No matter what I do, they're going to end up taking a considerable part of a day, several hours in the morning, and then all the processing time ahead of that. These are being done or supported by donations. We're probably going to be able to maintain the ability to do these over the months of May and June. June is questionable depending on how much we can raise in cash to pay for server time and T3 rental and all of that kind of crud, bandwidth and such. However, in any event, I don't want to spend days and days and days on each report. We've got tons of stuff to go through. There's lots of immediacy data. You may have noticed there's been a fairly significant swelling in a lot of texting and such things as Twitter. That's where we get most of the immediacy data. It's not from things like email and that sort of a deal. We do gather some off of fora as well, and that are fairly high churn rates. So we'll start by going right into our data on the Ukraine and the situation there. All of our data sets, by the way, from all of the discussion from this point on, I'll try and use as declarative and as clear a structure as I can to describe what the data has provided us. The immediacy data has some details, but it has a tendency to be less structured, less tied together. And so you have a tendency to skip around a bit more in terms of the interpretation. It's like sort of an open Twitter feed in that regard in terms of the subject, changes. Not as rapidly as Twitter, though. Anyway, though, so we start right off with Ukraine. We have data sets indicating that the situation will build and that a war will break. We think, relative to our data, that major warfare, if you want to think of it that way, will take place on the on or about the summer solstice, near the end of June. So June 20th this year, 21st. Anyway, so that'll be the actual outbreak of the war, if you want to think of it that way. We have a lot of data about the progress of that. All this stuff comes from the short-term data. It's not as voluminous as the immediacy data. However, because it's a high-priority subject with a lot of emotion around it, we have tons of cross-links between the short-term and the immediacy data on this subject. So we could go into some level of specifics. If I was writing this up, we might spend 6 or 8 pages on it. We just have that much in the way of potential details. In an audio report, it's less pertinent to get into that. The idea is to give sort of a news report for all you people up early in the morning and all the ships at sea kind of a thing. And our data would suggest from a news report headline viewpoint that the Ukraine war will pop off on or around the solstice. It'll be relatively short. There will be a merging more or less harmoniously with the victims of the CIA's problems in the Ukraine back to Mother Russia. This won't be the end of things. It won't be, it's not the beginning. It's certainly going to be the end of the beginning, though. And so there won't no prelude after that. And the Ukraine war is going to have profound effects. The number of crosslinks that go back between that particular subset of the data and a lot of the other data is quite extensive, as one may anticipate. We have thick, ropey masses of crosslinks that lead from one part of our model space back over to another. Let me take a second to quickly describe that. Our model space is built in a freeware version of AutoCAD, where each and every pixel in a basically an aquarium tank cubicle form that's 60 million pixels on a side. Each pixel represents a word cluster that the data set has found, and the such things as intensity, hue, color, etc. denote emotional components. And then we have another view of model space that shows the crosslinks absent the individual data pixels. So in other words, in that view, it would look like a bunch of earthworms in a bucket. And you'd be able to just, we can, from the software, pick one end of one earthworm and follow it to the end of that earthworm and see where he terminates in our linguistic structures. These crosslinks are very, very extensive between the Ukraine war subsets and the greater financial war that's being waged overhead, if you will. It's not in the background. The financial war is the war, and the elements on the ground in Ukraine, from the solstice, near the solstice and onward, will be reflections of what's going on in the financial war, rather than instigators or triggers or catalysts. So the elements on the ground, when you see things occurring in the sense of an old-fashioned war, by that time the war will have been decided or well advanced on the financial end. And so the elements that are going to be in play in the form of, territory seized, resources and all that kind of thing, reallocated, these sorts of on-the-ground people stomping around, moving atoms about, are really an after effect of the war itself, insofar as at least what our data would suggest. Now, further, there's very large, so we have, just as a way of housekeeping details, the Ukraine war subset, even in the immediacy data, has well over 1,000 originating crosslinks within this subset. Some of the larger ones terminate in dollar, gold, silver, as may be expected. We also have them terminating in subsets about panic. We have them terminating in subsets that, a very interesting one that I found quite fascinating was a crosslink over to the crack up boom concept in the Austrian economics thinking of it. It's not described that way in the data, or not with that language, but it's quite clearly being described as a crack up boom, in the sense that we have desperate, drunken, and there's also within the subset of the drunken, we have other language to that effect: intoxicated, out of your mind, feverish, and so on and so on and so on, hallucinating, many different words implying some kind of a fugue state of the brain, along with the idea of a desperate attempt to bail on the dollar, to basically spend paper, to spend out all of your paper before it becomes worthless. And so this crack up boom kind of language within the immediacy data is very clearly indicating that 2014, this year, in January, that's when the feverish pace began to accelerate. The crack up boom subset is also cross-tied back over to the gold, silver, dollars, EU, all different kinds of currencies, the EU economy, to a subset of diaspora, and to another subset, which is itself cross-tied back to the Ukraine war, which is a gold sell-off. And this is cross-tied back over to the central banks and another subset we'll get to in a minute. But the Ukraine war subset, here, I gotta have some notes I need to get back to. The Ukraine war subset is directly tied to this idea of a gold sell-off that will occur, that is going to be initially met with a sense of despair or angst or anxiety by the populace that is emotionally invested in gold, as well as financially invested in gold, because there's going to be this emotional pressure to feel as though the price of gold in various currencies is going to be driven downward by people trying to unload precious metals in order to potentially pay for war kind of things. It's an interesting concept here. In terms of the data set, it's not clear that that's in fact going to occur, but it's rather stating a whole series of fears. So let me see if I can describe this in a way that'll be meaningful. We have these data sets that are immediacy data. They're effective from 0 days after we get through the interpretation. Many times it's already happened by the time we get through that. Most effective 3 days out to about 14 days or so. And so here we have a data set about let's say an industry fear of an announced gold sale just shortly before or in the midst of an outburst of activity in warfare around and about Ukraine. This announced gold sale is being described in the immediacy data as a emotion-crushing blow. I'm laughing, and you'll see why in a second, to the gold aficionados, people with an emotional investment in gold. And these people are very much distressed about all of this because it's a fairly large gold sale announcement. And they figure it will suppress the price of gold just when no one wanted that to occur. Now, the interesting part of this is that the data set that links into that gold auction provides us a terminating data set that indicates the results are anything but what the central banksters might want. And the reason is that this one gold sale alone, which is described as a panic buy, an active auction, with active being described in the sense of fisticuffs, battles to get a seat, all kinds of machinations to undermine other bidders, a nasty, brutal kind of a situation. And it's sort of like oversold, if you will. There's so many seats at the table or in the auction house, and the clamor in terms of the description in the data to get in is overwhelming to the process as a whole. So the description goes on to provide, as I say, a panic buying situation where the sellers of the gold, and this may include central banks, I don't know if it's government. We could say that basically if we wanted to make a further interpretation of it, we could say that it's probably a corporation for a government, but the end result is anything but what the central banksters would want, because apparently this single auction has the effect of driving up the price of gold simply because of the scenes coming out on independent as well as mainstream financial media about the frenzy to own and the links that people went to get a place in this auction. Now, or major sale or something. I don't know that it's an auction per se in that format. Now, the data sets go on to suggest that there's some quavers, and a lot of people are in the sense of delivery, and so it apparently at the last minute or even after the auction is over, those people that thought or the sale thought that they had some of the gold will be told that, oops, we changed our mind, we're not going to sell after all, here's your fiat currency back, which is going to cause a lot of problems in and of itself apparently later on. So to start back at the beginning of the trail again and lead us back up to where we're at, we've got a Ukraine war going hot on the ground on or about the solstice in end of June. Prior to that, we have an escalation in the financial war that's the real war going on overhead. During that period of time, certain events occur, some connected, cross-connected to a diaspora, a movement of people. And so it may be that that is part of the Ukraine war in the sense of people being dispersed and moving out of the way of the thing. In any event, there's an announced gold sale. There's some hints in there that some of the gold may be antique. It may be jewelry, this kind of thing. There's some level of descriptors seeming to indicate that. But in any event, there's an announced gold sale and something of a panic buy to get in on it. It may or may not have an auction format. It has an unanticipated side effect in that the panic itself is just being viewed on the alternative media and mainstream media as a point of human interest, just the same way that we see, fist fights in various legislatures around the world. So it gets a wide audience, and that causes something of a price spike. Okay, so now going back to the Ukraine war and its start in the beginning of summer, more or less, we find that this process is transformative, that the advent of the war around the solstice ends up with I'm going to have to say a positive impact from the data sets on a large percentage of the global population, and even on a large percentage of the population within the Kabbalistically controlled Anglo-American Empire. This is described as being transformative, and we have some level of detail in terms of people merging, some diaspora stuff going on. But in the end, generally a positive thing for the locals. It brings a boost in investment capital back into Ukraine. There's a lot of infrastructure rebuilds and so on that occur as a result of this process. And it has a real cross-connect, a series of cross-connects from the start of the war through to the point of the beginning of the transformation. Now, both of these, bear in mind, are processes. They're not single events. So the war doesn't start on a day and end in a day. It's not that kind of a deal. The on-the-ground warfare is very short, but it's just one in a long series of manifesting battles that really are reflecting what's going on in this financial war as the cabal that's controlling everything, the blood-sucking, pedophilic run guys basically have run into a number of walls, and that's covered in some of our data, but I won't have the time to go into it today. Anyway, the transformative process of the Ukraine war is, that part of it is very much cross-connected back over to the dollar. And this is cross-connected. We're able to get a good read on the dollar here because of some other work I'm doing, which I'll discuss at the end of this IDIR report. Sorry about that. There will necessarily be interruptions here that I'm not even going to take the time to try and edit out. They're doing all kinds of road work and large trucks rumbling by and attempting to destroy our property here. And I've got to go out and deal with that occasionally. In any event, so we have a cross-link back from the transformative process at its very initial stage. These are from our shorter-term data, which takes us out to the end of June. Most of the other data, you understand, trails off about mid-May or so. The short-term in this regard stands out fairly easily, but we don't have a lot of volume. Again, I'll discuss that in the new work here at the end of this IDIR report. Anyway, the crosslinks go and they terminate in a subset that drills down basically to the dollar through 3 or 4 different header sets. So we're coming at it from the Fed, we're coming at it from government, coming at it from a corporate view, all end up at the dollar that's cross-linked back over to the transformative process begun in the world with the boots on the ground section of the Ukraine war, and which is part of, as I say, the larger financial war. Anyway, it terminates here within the dollar in a very key subset that indicates a small error has very great consequences for the Federal Reserve. A very small error in some way is going to bring about dispersion of the Fed itself. I'm not noting I don't know if the Fed's going to end now. I actually think it ends up finally dissolving itself in a November month. But in any event, we have this small error that brings about a dispersion of assets or presumed assets in terms of the debt of the Fed. And so as subsets of the dispersion, we find there's repetition of sets going to the idea that these guys just can't do anything correct anymore, that nothing they do works out from this particular point forward. The small error may have already happened, by the way, because it's so close to the beginning of the movement of model space. It's just that we may not really notice it now. And it'll magnify as it goes forward. In any event, what we end up with is a dispersion of the presumed assets, and I put mental quotes around the word assets, that the Fed has, because they have nothing except for debt that they've in essence decided to monetize by printing, quote, money behind it. We have a lot of poetic language about strong winds or sweep away. Strong winds create giant waves they can't overcome. Strong winds prevent sailing, basically a strong headwind kind of a thing. All kinds of poetic language, which we always get, and that's a certain measure of that is used as an idea to give us an idea of how strong the archetype is relative to the strength of what's going on in the emotional indicators. And we have a very strong archetype, and we have a very strong subset of emotional indicators that are already over our 59. They're into the 59%, and this is not percentile, but 59%. Of the emotional response range. And a staggering success for us was the Concordia, that ocean liner that fell over, and it had a 35% correlation with the linguistics ahead of time, and it was a really good success. So here we are at 59, so I think we've got a real hit here pending. The question is when it manifests. There should be a lot of activity on or around the solstice. But prior to that is when the small error really starts building and then cross-links over into the transformative process in the Ukraine war. So that's why I'm saying the small error may already have occurred. They may have already created the situation that's going to later on just royally ream the Fed, leading to a dispersion of these presumed assets. Maybe they'll be forced to do, some kind of staggering reappraisal, revaluation of their assets, and they'll end up being seen as, empty, hollow. We have all these kind of words: empty, hollow, expired, dead, corpse. All it just goes on and on and on and on. And basically about the paper tiger component of the Fed, and how they're just have printed themselves into the point where they're sitting on a mountain of paper and no one wants the paper anymore. And we have these cross-links saying that when this dispersion occurs, which, by the way, as I said, we already have a 59% correlation, but when the dispersion occurs, that is heavily cross-linked back over to the beginning of the period of, let's just say, the Great Confusion or the Grand Confusion that's going to exist within the Anglo-American Western world. It's not limited to the United States of America. It's not limited to these United States of America. It's not limited to the United States of America, the corporation formed in the late 1800s that's been a pain in the ass and ruling us ever since. It's not limited to North America. It's not limited to the Canadians. And it's not limited to the United Kingdom and its Commonwealth. It's all of those. The confusion is in all of the Anglo-American Empire, as the dollar takes this spike through the heart, as the vampires are finally put back into their grave. Now, in direct cross-links from the dispersion subset of the dollar encountering the spike through the heart, go back over to the precious metals control or suppression, which is cross-linked back all the way around over to the gold panic thing, which occurs later, actually. The underlying, from our data set, even though the panic buying at this sale creates an emotional wave that goes around the planet relative to precious metals and sets off a new price revaluation for gold, but also silver. Even though that's the case, the real underlying story is in the financial warfare going on over our heads at the moment, if you want to think about it metaphorically. And that within there we have a cross-link from the end of the suppression, or we have a cross-link that, let me put it this way, we're a cross-link that I discovered within the dollar hit and within the subset of the dispersion that's way up there within the primary supporting layer for the dispersion. And from that subset, if you look at that subset, you've got this cross-link that goes directly over to the silver suppression, and then actually into the gold and other precious metals. And actually, it's only really silver and gold. There's some kind of suppression on rhodium, why I don't know, but in any event, the silver suppression shows that it ends with the dispersion that occurs within the central bank structure as it encounters the magnifying problems of this small error that's in existence already, perhaps, or will shortly be seen, that then runs smack into the problems that are going to be encountered in the financial war, from which we'll see a manifestation sometime around the solstice in June on the ground in Ukraine that is a manifestation actually of triumph. Okay, so in our descriptor set, the quote Ukraine ground boots on the ground sort of war is more of the kind of a parade one might see in the conquering of Paris, or the liberation of Rome, or even way back when a more of a returning of the Caesars from the foreign wars kind of thing. In the sense, it's a lot of people welcome it. It's a joyous kind of a deal going on, and the victors are feeling pretty good about it. And and so here's the thing: our data sets show that when that is actually occurring, they in fact are victors already at a certain level within the financial war that gives them a very large boost up. And to those who have eyes to see, this is a clearly stabilizing new relationships within global power politics. So that all having been said, the silver suppression ends with this dispersion point of the Fed. Now, there's no time connection within the subset or within the cross-links that go from the dispersion back over to the silver suppression that cracks. When the silver suppression cracks, the price just goes whoosh. I mean, it's no longer like restrained energy. It's like energy let loose. The subsets within the supporting chain for the end of the silver suppression include descriptors in the immediacy data that are springs let loose, all different kinds of basically, shooting to the moon, rising really fast, all different kinds of language to that effect. Now, and it's basically the overriding descriptor for that is energy so long restrained knows no bounds. So if you get into the poetic of it, I like that part of it. Energy, and knows no bounds. It's like, it gives you an appreciation for where it could go. But nonetheless, of course, it is all relative to the dollar dying at that point. And what actually goes on is apparently this dispersion of assets ends up in a vaporization of the Fed or vaporization of their assets. And at that point, silver is taking off. There's some indication to think that this might be before the June solstice. I say that because we have another subset. Hang on. We have the dispersion subset from the dollar is, and that's different from the dispersion subset that's within the silver suppression. Each are individually held by those larger dominating sets, although they are cross-linked. So the dispersion subset is the same primary descriptor, or same descriptor, primary support and secondary support as we find in the silver suppression, but tertiary support and all those change from the silver suppression and so it's not an identical copy or anything like that. We do get those occurrences frequently. But there's a lot of cross-links over to from the primary and secondary levels in the dollar section over to the silver suppression. This is meaningful because it allows us to differentiate the dispersion within the silver suppression and how it will react, as well as what its triggers might be. And we find that the dispersion subset within the silver suppression is actually focused on the suppression itself. And in other words, the language is indicating that the ability to suppress silver disperses into vapors when the assets of the suppressors are run into this headwind, all these strong winds sweeping through, cleaning things away, all of that kind of language. When that occurs, then the effect is literally a vaporization. And it's saying here within the subsets that it's instantaneous, takes no time at all. It's going to be no real barrier. So basically, when the suppression goes, then the price lifts off in this restrained energy that basically to the moon, Alice kind of thing. Anyway, so the small error within the dollar may or may not have already occurred, but we do have a very clear pointer here to the solstice in 1, 2, 3, 4 major sets, all of which have cross-links back over to the end of the silver suppression, as well as all of those sets having cross-links back over to the dollar, and it looks like before the end of June. We also have other sets that are independent of the suppression set, but are nonetheless within the silver and precious metals collections that indicate that silver, independent of gold, both of which are moving, but in each in their own movement, are cross-tied themselves back over to the transformative set of the Ukraine war manifesting on or before the solstice. And they also have their own internal set, independent, no cross links, directly held within the larger subset, their own set of energy too long restrained, basically going to the moon again. And these are all cross-linked back over to the transformative period within the Ukraine war, which, as I say, is the boots manifesting on the ground, but by then things have already occurred. The data sets are quite clear that that's an aftermath, not a prelude, not the main event. It's just the parade after the main event kind of a deal. The guy in the ring stomping around, holding up the belt all sweaty and stuff. Only in this case, he's not so sweaty because he didn't have to do that much. Because they're doing this thing on the background. Now, we have all kinds of data sets for other activity. Let's see, we're running about 35 minutes here. Okay, so we've got a bunch of notes here that go into the state of confusion that's going to exist as a result of these events on or before June 21, or the solstice. I guess we'll have to just table them for later. We just can't keep going. I've got too much activity going, and they're going to shut our power down. Not that that's a big deal to me, but it means I've got to go and turn on the generator and so forth. So I don't think that there's anything within our other notes here. Okay, so anyway, we've got a lot of information relative to weather. None of it's going to be good anywhere, basically. There's going to be a few nice spots around the planet, but most of the language we're getting is for extreme weather all the way through spring into summer, including hailstorms, out-of-season wind and rain conditions. Apparently there's going to be another battering of the California coast all the way down into Baja, extra seasonal storms. Maybe we're looking at the Pineapple Express that we usually get up here in the Northwest slipping further down there, because our data sets for our weather are showing things that are more Mediterranean-like. A little bit nicer than we usually see, although our spring has just been terrible because we've been getting winter storms, and we're probably going to get one in the next day or next half day here. These are horrific levels of rain that we don't usually get at this time of the year. In any event, the weather around the planet is also showing that we've got some atypical conditions developing in northern Africa that may go all the way up into the Middle East. The wind pattern appears to be, from the viewpoint of the linguistics, the wind pattern appears to be more key than any of the transient manifestations like tornadoes, dust storms, water spouts, a lot of references to circular winds. Maybe we're going to have a very nasty hurricane season. If so, I would also expect to see some kind of like quasi-hurricane things in the region of the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. Very atypical weather as we go through the rest of the year, but this is over the next 2 months or so based on short-term data. Okay, diaspora, gold, silver, gold sell-off, panic buy. I suspect that we'll see the panic sale of gold sometime in mid to late June. There's just no telling when it's going to actually go off, because I don't have it's an entirely separate subset of details that's cross-connected back up into the gold subset, but without any indication as to timing. And within the immediacy data, I can't really shift the model space so far as to be, or widen it out so far as to be able to see when it occurred, when it got picked up in the data set. Okay, so we've got all of that. I think that's it. Let's see. This is my little donation spiel. If you got a few Satoshis, maybe you can kick them our way. It costs us some money to do these weird ass things, even though, even though it doesn't seem like it, there's a lot of activity involved in this, and a lot of electricity. And my poor guy Igor, he costs money and so on. Actually, we're trying to get his butt moved back out of fracked up parts of the U.S. over here to the coast. He's thinking of relocating to Oregon coast. Okay, so we can use a few Satoshis or a few dollars if you want to throw them our way. That may be less of an issue as we go forward, because this next section I wanted to talk about, which is this new development that we've come up with that I'm calling at the moment a potentiometer. I don't really have a better label for it. What we have done is something I was presented with a unique ability this year to track data sets relative on a day-by-day basis on the short-term data, or excuse me, on the immediacy data and the short-term data, what little was coming in a way that I have not in the past. And this is because I'd been doing reports and so on, but I was sort of hamstrung here by our having to move servers and all the stuff that's going on at my place here as well as at Igor's. And so I took the opportunity just to fill some time and do some experimentation to track language on a day-to-day basis. And it's been probably, well, last time I did it, I think was 1995 or 1996 when I was building up the lexicon before I really did that first run. Anyway, though, in doing so, I did it in a different way, and I've looked at the emotional components in a different fashion. And so I think what I've developed is a potentiometer. Now, here's how this relates. Let's take a description of the situation. let's say that there is a prediction within our data sets for an event, and we know from outside indicators that there's a very discrete definitive date for the event. So let's, like the Super Bowl. A number of years back, I predicted that the Super Bowl was going to lose electricity. And indeed, that Super Bowl did lose electricity. If I'd had the potentiometer at that particular time, I would have been able to predict the amount of certainty that the electricity would have popped off before the event occurred. I would have been able to say, oh, there's a 68% or, a 50% or something like that likelihood that this particular Super Bowl will lose electricity, and it looks like it'll have this kind of an impact. Now, our potentiometer works by being able to track events that we know are discrete and separate and have a fixed occurrence date relative to language that builds up and swells around it and so on. So one could say, let's talk about something really arcane so we don't get involved in the subject matter. Okay, so no one gives a rat's ass about tennis anymore. And so we could say, for instance, that we're going to bet on Wimbledon and who's going to win in Wimbledon. And we're going to discuss that here relative to the potentiometer. If we knew that we wanted to bet on Wimbledon and we have our potentiometer here, then I could run a data gathering focused on that in a deterministic fashion some months out, and I could predict, okay, at that point the winners of Wimbledon in these particular categories will be the following individuals, described by characteristics. They may not show up as their names, but we would get things, Hungarian born or, tall redhead, that kind of thing. Descriptors that would allow us within the relatively limited field involved in the Wimbledon to pick the winners, and then we could go and place our bets. Now, what we need to note, though, is that we've discovered that the language changes over time. Now, we've always known that language changes over time, but we've never been able to quantify it and qualify it. I've been able to do that in this condition over these past couple of months, that I've been able to take a specific case and move it out and push it out into the general state of things, and we'll see how well it hangs together here. But the potentiometer would allow us to say, okay, 3 months out from Wimbledon, it looks like this red-headed guy is going to win at this particular category. And then we do it again at the end, 2 months. 2 months out, we find out, oh, look, things are shifting around this red-headed guy. And we don't know anything about who the red-headed guy is. We don't investigate him. We don't look at his track record. We may find out who he is just because there's only one red-headed guy, going to be in this particular category of playing, left-handed tennis in Wimbledon. And so we could find out who he is, but it's not pertinent to us because what we're doing is we're tracking the emotional changes in the language over time leading up to this known fixed event. And so we could, at that point, go and hedge our bet 2 months out and say, looks like redheaded guy's dropped, his emotional components by a third. So maybe he's not quite so certain. So maybe we'd better hedge that and bet against him and so on, that, he wouldn't win. And so by the time we get down to, 1 month out and then 3 weeks out and so on, we could do this run each and every time and watch the emotional componentry of this whole process change over time. And that's our potentiometer, because it clearly shows decreasing and increasing values in specific emotional components within this multi-dimensional array. I've got hooked all these words within the lexicon, shift over time to the point where we would be able to say with some certainty by the time we got down to the immediacy language, which is 3 days to 14 days. Oh yeah, redheaded guy, hey, he's got no chance at all. We've been tracking him for two months now, and that's not going to happen for this guy, in spite of the fact that by that time he may be the crowd favorite. And so we would know to bet on Hottie Handwarmer, the guy from Crackheadistan, who no one gave a damn about, and this fellow's gonna with black hair is gonna win the this particular category. And redheaded guy, we know at that point had gone from a value of 846 down to 25 in his emotional components. So from our viewpoint, that would be relatively certain, a predictor on something as wildly uncertain or as certain. I mean, I don't know. In terms of tennis, I don't know how evenly matched and how predictive it is. I'm just using that as an example. So you could apply it to anything relative to the potentiometer, anything that we can catch a level of deterministic hunt on. So this is a rather interesting bit of insight for us, and will allow us over time, as we, especially now, even as we're moving in towards the solstice. So we'll run another set of data here fairly quick, and we'll point again, now that we have a target to shoot for, which is the solstice. We know it's going to occur. Then we'll do another little bit of a twist and see if we can't use this potentiometer to track certain data sets to see how likely some of these things are to occur, and see whether those individual things shift between now and the solstice, and at what point we would say, okay, it's continuing to trend this way and it's gaining, or in fact the interpretation has shifted because we've dropped these two key emotional indicators, blah, blah, blah. We just don't know how it's going to play out. But we do have a potentiometer now that has got a 2 serious levels of track record underneath it. And it's given us a new insight as to how the language shifts ahead of the actual manifestation in reality. I've done some noodling and thinking, mainly on this Saturday, paddling my poor shoulders off all over the bay out here, but I've been thinking about the cross-correlation between events, time, templates, and our data sets that may provide some insight, more insight as we go along. But this is going to be a very interesting and unique period, especially if any of the data that we're getting as the longer and shorter term is true, then it would tend to indicate sometime before the solstice on the 21st, we're going to see this manifestation of the breakout of the boots on the ground kind of component in the sense of the Ukraine war. And by that time, the financial war will have gone through one battle that would have had the Kabbalistic pedophilic bastards in the West losing, and that as a subset of that, the Fed is going to have made a small error that's going to come and ream them seriously, leading to an investigation and a dispersion of their assets, which in turn leads to a dispersion of their ability to control the precious metals market. And that's pretty much how it would lay out. And so the indication is that, by sometime in summer, the suppression of the precious metals market should be over. Within summer itself, not necessarily on the day of the solstice, although the process, because I don't know how long the process of that suppression is ending is going to take. Is it a week long, 1 day, even though it all vaporizes instantly in terms of the assets for the Fed, and the suppression vaporizes and these things take off. I don't know how long it would be before we're going to see that in terms of the prices shooting up. So, but it does suggest that this is going to be in summer. And that, I guess, is a recap here. I don't have any more notes on that. Okay, so that's the end of this particular Immediacy Data Intelligence Report. Let's hope there's some intelligence in it. There certainly is a lot of immediacy data. And we've gotten a fair number of recent hits on the immediacy data, so there's no reason to suppose that this set is any less accurate and available. If this is the case, it ought to be a good summer for the precious metals bugs. And basically, I guess that's it, guys. The new track here on the potentiometer, we've already got some people interested in applying that to their technology. I just happened to be discussing it with a competitor, and they were quite intrigued with this idea. And so we may be able to end some of our financial problems here by going that route. But in any event, we'll for sure keep on with the immediacy data reports here through to, we can get them all for sure through the next month, through May. I'm certain we can do that. Beyond that, it becomes a little bit fragile, and we'll just see how it all lays out. But nonetheless, the potentiometer has some potential behind it. Bye, y'all.